The desert wind cut through Clara's wool shawl like a blade of ice. She pulled the reins tighter, urging her mare forward across the endless expanse of sand and rock. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, lay Larkspur, that cursed town where every soul knew her as the murderer's widow. The title clung to her like dust on a traveler's coat, impossible to shake clean. Her husband had been dead 3 weeks now, shot down in the street like the rabid dog he was, but his sins had become hers in the eyes of decent folk. Gun runner, killer, monster. They spat these words at her shadow as she gathered what little she could carry and fled into the night. The moon hung low and cold above the Arizona territory, casting long shadows across the saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels. Clara's mare stumbled, exhausted from hours of hard riding. She needed water, rest, shelter, but more than that, she needed distance from everything she'd left behind. A flickering light appeared ahead through the darkness. The stage stop at Willow Creek. Clara had coins enough for feed and perhaps a corner to rest, though she dreaded facing any human eyes. She dismounted slowly, her legs trembling from the long ride, and led her mare toward the shabby wooden structure. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall. 3 men sat around a scarred table, cards scattered between them. They looked up as she entered, their eyes sliding over her travel-worn dress and dusty face. She kept her gaze down, moving toward the proprietor behind the rough-hewn bar. "Need grain for my horse," she said quietly. "And water." The proprietor, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, nodded toward the door. "Truff's outside. Grain's 2 bits." As Clara fumbled for coins, the door creaked open behind her. She tensed, expecting pursuit, but the newcomer moved past her to the bar with barely a glance. He was tall, lean in the way of men who lived hard and ate little, with dust-covered leather chaps and a hat pulled low over weathered features. Caleb Hart, the proprietor, greeted him. "Thought you were heading south to Silver Ridge." "Did?" The man's voice was low, rough as sandstone. "Brought Tom's body to his kin, buried him proper. Sorry business. He was a good man." "He was." Caleb accepted a whiskey, downing it in one swallow. His eyes, gray as winter sky, flickered toward Clara. "Ma'am traveling alone?" It wasn't a friendly question. Out here, a woman alone meant trouble, either running from it or bringing it with her. Clara straightened her spine. "My business is my own." "Fair enough." He turned back to the bar, but she caught his reflection in the cracked mirror, watching her. Though the desert's no place for anyone alone, especially come nightfall. Clara paid for the grain and headed outside. Her hands shook as she measured out feed for her mare. The cold had deepened, and she realized with growing dread that she couldn't ride much farther. Her body ached, and the mare was near spent. "You got somewhere to head?" She startled. Caleb Hart stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight. "I said my business is your own." "I heard." He stepped into the moonlight, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. Younger than his voice suggested, maybe 35, with the lines carved deep by sun and sorrow. But if you're running from something, riding blind into the desert won't save you. Just give the buzzards a feast. "And what makes you think I'm running?" His smile was brief and humorless. "Because I know the look. Wore it myself more than once." They stood in silence while her mare drank deeply from the trough. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "Got a place about 15 miles northwest, Dust Hollow, nothing fancy, but it's shelter. You could rest up, figure out your next move." "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "Maybe because I just planted a friend who died alone." His voice carried a weight of grief still fresh. "Maybe because the desert's claimed enough souls. Or maybe," he shrugged, "maybe I'm just a fool who can't mind his own business." Clara studied him, searching for deception or worse intentions. But his eyes held only a tired sort of kindness, the kind that came from knowing too much sorrow. "I can't pay much." "Didn't ask for pay. Men always want something. Some men do." He adjusted his hat. "I'm offering a roof and walls. Nothing more." You can leave whenever you choose. The mayor finished drinking, and Clara had to decide. Back in Larkspur, they'd be forming a posse by morning, eager to drag the murderer's widow back for whatever justice they saw fit. Ahead lay only darkness and unknown dangers. This man could be one of them, but something in his bearing, the quiet grief he carried, made her take the gamble. 15 miles? Thereabouts. Trail's rough but passable. She nodded once. I'll follow. They rode in silence through the cold desert night. Caleb led the way, his mount sure-footed on the rocky trail that wound between towering red stone formations. The landscape was alien to Clara, who'd lived her whole life in town until 3 weeks ago. Out here, the world seemed stripped down to its bones, rock, sand, and the vast black dome of sky punctured by countless stars. Dust Hollow appeared just as dawn began to gray the eastern horizon. It was less a ranch than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against a massive red cliff. A main house of adobe and rough timber, a barn that had seen better days, a few outbuildings, and a corral where 2 horses raised their heads at their approach. It's not much, Caleb said, dismounting, but it's quiet. Quiet is what I need. He showed her to a small cabin beside a dry creek bed, maybe 50 yards from the main house. Inside was sparse but clean, a narrow cot, a table and chair, a wood stove, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Creek runs in spring, he said. Well's behind the main house for water. There's jerky and flour, some canned goods, coffee if you want it. Why do you have this place set up? Had a hand who used it. He moved on last month. Caleb paused at the door. I'll be at the house if you need anything. Otherwise, I keep to myself. That suits me fine. He touched his hat brim and left. Clara stood alone in the small space, listening to his bootfalls fade. For the first time in weeks, she felt she could breathe. The walls were thin, but they were walls nonetheless. Between her and the world that wanted to devour her. She unsaddled her mare and turned her out in the corral, then hauled water from the well. The sun climbed higher, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and orange. The beauty of it stopped her cold. In Larkspur, she'd lived in shadows, first her husband's, then those cast by his crimes. Here, the light fell clean and honest on everything it touched. Inside the cabin, she found a cracked mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back was a stranger. Hollow cheeks, dark circles, hair gone dull as old straw. But alive, against all odds, alive. She heated water and washed the trail dust away, then lay down on the narrow cot. Sleep took her instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, the sun had passed its zenith. Through the window, she saw Caleb working on a fence rail, his movements steady and methodical. There was something calming in watching him work, the simple rhythm of hammer on nail. That evening, he knocked on her door with a pot of stew. Figured you might be hungry. It's nothing special, rabbit and whatever vegetables haven't gone soft. She accepted it gratefully. They ate in silence on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of purple and rose. That friend you buried, Clara said eventually. Were you close? Since we were boys, fought in the war together. He was supposed to marry a girl back in Missouri, but Caleb's jaw tightened. A lot of things were supposed to happen that didn't. I'm sorry. Yeah. He stood, collecting the empty bowls. Well, get some rest. Desert gets cold at night. There's extra blankets in the chest. Alone again. Clara noticed something she'd missed before. On the small shelf beside the bed sat a photograph in a tarnished frame. She picked it up, angling it toward the fading light. It showed Caleb, years younger, standing beside a pretty blonde woman in a white dress. But it wasn't a wedding portrait. The woman stood slightly apart, her hand resting on the arm of another man whose face had been torn from the picture. Only Caleb remained whole, looking not at the camera but at the woman, with an expression of such naked longing that Clara felt like an intruder. She set the photograph back carefully. Whatever promises bound Caleb's heart, whatever ghost he carried, it was his burden to bear. She had enough ghosts of her own. That night, the desert wind howled around the cabin walls, and Clara pulled the blankets tight. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes called to each other across the vast emptiness. But for the first time since becoming a widow, she didn't dream of blood in the street or accusing eyes. She dreamed of red rocks and clean light, and a quiet man who offered shelter without asking for her sins in return. The morning sun found Clara already awake, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. She'd slept better than she had in months, but old habits died hard. She still woke before dawn, listening for footsteps that never came. Through the cabin window, she watched Caleb lead his horses to water, his movements careful and deliberate. She'd been at Dust Hollow 3 days now, and they'd settled into a rhythm of polite distance. He left food at her door, sometimes stew, sometimes biscuits and salt pork, and she'd taken to leaving the cleaned dishes on his porch. They nodded when their paths crossed, but rarely spoke beyond the necessities. On the 4th morning, Clara found him struggling with a broken fence rail near the barn. His left hand was wrapped in a bloody cloth. What happened? He glanced up, grimacing. Damn coyote got into the chicken coop last night. Caught him, but he caught me back. Let me see. It's nothing. It's not nothing if it goes septic. She'd learned enough about wounds from her husband's associates, patching up men who couldn't visit proper doctors. Come on. Reluctantly, he followed her to the cabin. She heated water and unwrapped his hand, revealing deep puncture wounds across his palm. The flesh was already angry and swollen. This needs cleaning and proper bandaging. You have any whiskey? In the house. She fetched the bottle and clean cloth, then set to work. He sat rigid as she cleaned the wounds, his jaw clenched against the sting of alcohol. You've done this before, he observed. Had to learn. She didn't elaborate, focusing on wrapping the bandage tight, but not too tight. Keep this clean and dry. I'll change it tomorrow. Appreciate it. He flexed his fingers experimentally. Guess I owe you now. You don't owe me anything. You gave me shelter when I needed it. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. There was something unsettling in his gaze, not desire or judgment, but a kind of recognition, as if he saw past her careful walls to the woman beneath. That afternoon, she found him trying to mend the chicken coop one-handed. You'll tear those wounds open, she said. Coop needs fixing, or we'll lose more birds. Then let me help. He started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. Together, they reinforced the wire and patched the gaps where the coyote had broken through. Clara held boards while he hammered, handed him tools before he asked. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm. You weren't always a town woman, he said after a while. My father had a small farm. Before, she caught herself. Before I married. What happened to it? Sold to pay debts, her husband's debts, from failed schemes and whiskey. But she didn't say that. Nothing left of it now. That evening, instead of leaving dinner at her door, he knocked. Figured we could eat at the house. Seems foolish. Cooking for one when there's 2 of us. It was the first crack in the wall between them. Clara hesitated, then nodded. His kitchen was simple but clean, dominated by a large iron stove and a table scarred from years of use. She helped prepare the meal, venison stew with wild onions and the last of the winter potatoes from his root cellar. They ate without much conversation, but the silence felt companionable rather than strained. After dinner, she noticed him favoring his injured hand. Let me rewrap that. This time, he didn't protest. As she worked, she was aware of his nearness, the heat of his skin under her fingers. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently. Why are you running? Clara? She hadn't told him her name. He must have guessed she'd give a false one if asked. How did you... Heard about what happened in Larkspur. Dead gun runner. Young widow disappeared. His grip was firm but not threatening. That you? She could have lied. But what was the point? Yes. Did you kill him? No. The word came out bitter. Someone else saved me the trouble. He released her wrist. I'm not judging. Man who runs guns to raiders and worse. World's better off without him. Tell that to the good people of Larkspur. The good people of Larkspur can go to hell. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. He stood abruptly, moving to stoke the fire. "I should go." Clara said, "Stay, just stay a while." So she did. They sat by the fire as darkness fell. Not speaking, but the silence held a different quality now. She found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he frowned. "That photograph in the cabin?" she said finally. "Who is she?" His hand stilled. "Her name was Catherine, Tom's fiancée, the friend I buried. You loved her." It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "Tom saved my life in the war, when he didn't make it home. I promised I'd look after her, make sure she was provided for, protected." His voice turned bitter. "Did a fine job of that." "She died of fever 2 winters ago, alone in some boarding house in Denver. I didn't even know she was sick until after." "You couldn't have known." "I should have been there. Should have—" He trailed off, staring into the flames. "Doesn't matter now." Clara understood the weight of such failures. She'd carried her own for so long they'd worn grooves in her soul. "My husband used to lock me in the storage shed when he did business," she said quietly. "Sometimes for days, said it was for my protection, but really he just didn't want me to see what kind of man he was, though I learned anyway." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I survived. That's more than some can say." A week passed, then 2. The search from Larkspur hadn't reached Dust Hollow, and Clara began to breathe easier. She took on more work around the ranch, feeding chickens, mending clothes, helping with the endless repairs an old place demanded. Her hands, soft from town living, grew calloused again. One night, she was awakened by the sound of horses. Her heart hammered as she crept to the window. 2 riders were talking to Caleb by the barn, their voices carrying on the still air. "Seen any strangers pass through? Woman, young, dark hair?" "Nobody comes through here," Caleb said. "Too far off the main trails. Mind if we water our horses?" "Help yourself." Clara pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. If they searched the buildings, but they didn't. After watering their mounts, the strangers rode on. She waited until the hoofbeats faded before venturing out. Caleb was still by the barn, rifle in hand. "They're gone," he said without turning. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. They'll be back, or others will. This place isn't as hidden as I'd like to think." "I'll leave tomorrow." "No." He faced her then, and she saw something fierce in his expression. "You'll stay until it's safe." "And when will that be?" "When I say so." The authority in his voice should have angered her. She'd had enough of men making decisions for her. But there was protectiveness there too, the kind that asked nothing in return. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Maybe because I failed someone once. Maybe I need to not fail again." The next morning brought unseasonable rain, turning the desert into a muddy mess. The roof of Clara's cabin, apparently sound in dry weather, revealed several leaks. She set out pots and pans to catch the drips, but by afternoon, water was coming in faster than she could contain it. Caleb appeared at her door, soaked from checking the livestock. "Can't stay here tonight. Main house has a spare room." She gathered her few belongings, and they dashed through the downpour. Inside, he stoked the fire while she wrung water from her hair. "I'll get some dry clothes," he said. "They'll be too big, but better than what you're wearing." He returned with a clean shirt and trousers, then discreetly turned his back while she changed. The clothes smelled of soap and cedar, hanging loose on her frame, but warm and dry. They made dinner together, the storm rattling the windows. The main house felt smaller with both of them in it, the space charged with an awareness that hadn't been there before, when their hands brushed reaching for the same dish. Clara felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the cold. After dinner, they sat by the fire again. The storm showed no sign of letting up. "Tell me about your life," she said. "Before all this." "Not much to tell. Grew up on a ranch in Texas, fought in the war." Came back to nothing. Family dead. Land sold. Drifted for a while before settling here. No wife? Children? No. He gave her a wry smile. Turns out promising to protect another man's woman doesn't leave much room for finding your own. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara felt her cheeks warm. The spare room. Down the hall, last door on the right, extra blankets in the chest. She stood to go, then hesitated. Caleb? Yeah, thank you, for everything. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. Get some rest, Clara. In the spare room. She lay listening to the storm and the sound of his footsteps in the main room. The bed was comfortable, the blankets warm, but sleep wouldn't come. She was too aware of his presence, the way he'd looked at her across the dinner table, the careful distance he maintained even as something else pulled them together. Near midnight, unable to stand the restlessness, she ventured out for water. The main room was dark, except for dying embers in the fireplace. She thought Caleb had gone to bed, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw him sitting in the chair by the window, keeping watch. Couldn't sleep either? He asked without turning. No. She moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested on the rifle across his lap. You think they'll come back tonight? Not in this weather, but habits die hard. Old soldiers' habits? Something like that. The rain had softened to a steady patter. In the dim light, she could just make out his profile, stern and watchful. Without thinking, she placed a hand on his shoulder. He stiffened at the touch. Clara, I know, she said softly. I know about promises and ghosts and all the reasons we tell ourselves, but we're both so alone. Caleb, doesn't it ever get to be too much? He turned then, looking up at her with eyes that held too much pain. Every damn day. For a moment, they stayed frozen like that. Then he stood abruptly, the rifle clattering to the floor, and pulled her roughly against him, his arms wrapped around her, not with passion but with desperate need, like a drowning man clutching driftwood. She held him back just as fiercely, her face pressed against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath the worn cotton. They clung to each other in the darkness, two damaged souls seeking shelter from their separate storms. When he finally pulled back, his hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You should go back to bed, he said hoarsely. Should I? His struggle was written plainly on his face. Duty warring with desire, the past fighting the present. In the end, duty won. It always did with men like him. Yes, you should. She stepped back, feeling the loss of his warmth immediately. Good night, Caleb. Good night. But as she walked away, she heard him whisper something that might have been her name, or might have been a prayer. In the spare room, she pressed her palms against her burning cheeks and wondered what kind of power a ghost had to hold two living people apart, and whether any promise was worth the loneliness that filled the space between them. The rider came at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. Clara watched from the kitchen window as Caleb met him by the corral, their voices low but urgent. When the stranger handed over a sealed envelope and rode off without even watering his mount, her stomach twisted with dread. Caleb stood in the yard for a long moment, staring at the letter. When he finally came inside, his face was grim. What is it? She asked. He set the envelope on the table between them. Message from the marshal in Tucson. They're expanding the search for you, offering a reward now. $500 for information leading to your capture. Clara sank into a chair. 500? That's more than most men see in a year. Someone wants you found badly. This isn't just about being a gun runner's widow anymore. His gray eyes studied her. What aren't you telling me? She'd held this back, hoping it wouldn't matter. Now she saw how naive that was. My husband, he kept ledgers, records of who he sold to, what they paid, which army shipments went missing. Her voice dropped. The authorities think I know where they are. Do you? No. But Samuel used to say if anything happened to him, those books would be my insurance. Said men in high places would pay well to keep their names out of them. She laughed bitterly. He never told me where he hid them. Just another way to keep me dependent, I suppose. Caleb paced to the window, watching the horizon. Those men in high places, they're the ones pushing for the reward. They want those ledgers, or they want to make sure you can't talk about what you might know. I don't know anything. Doesn't matter. The possibility is threat enough. He turned back to her. You can't stay here. The words she'd been dreading. I'll leave today. We'll leave today. She stared at him. Caleb, no, this isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling for composure. I told you I'd keep you safe. I meant it. What about the ranch? It'll keep. Got a neighbor who can look after the stock for a while. And where would we go? North, Colorado, maybe Wyoming. Plenty of places where folks don't ask questions if you don't cause trouble. Clara stood, moving closer to him. Why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a long moment, not meeting her eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. That night in the storm, I wanted to kiss you. God help me, I wanted more than that, and I hated myself for it. Because of her, Catherine. Because of a promise I made to a dead man. Because I swore I'd protect her, and I failed. And now... He finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath. Now I've got another chance. Maybe not to keep that promise, but to keep you safe. To do one damn thing right in my life. I'm not her, Caleb. I'm not some pure thing that needs protecting. I've done things. We've all done things. He caught her shoulders, gentle but firm. Whatever you were, whatever you did to survive, it doesn't matter. You're here now. You're alive. That's what matters. Tears burned her eyes. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen something worth saving? Pack what you need, he said softly. We'll leave after dark. They spent the day preparing. Caleb rode to the neighbor's ranch, returning with supplies and the promise that his stock would be cared for. Clara gathered her few possessions, helped prepare food for the journey. They worked in tense silence, aware that each hour brought potential danger closer. As the sun began to sink, Caleb saddled the horses while Clara filled canteens at the well. The desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of orange and purple. It struck her how this harsh land had become a kind of sanctuary, and now they were being driven from it too. Ready? Caleb asked, checking the rifle in his saddle scabbard. She nodded, then froze. Wait, there's something in the cabin. He frowned, but didn't argue as she hurried to the small dwelling that had been her refuge. Inside, she retrieved the photograph from the shelf, that image of Caleb and Catherine and the torn-away man. She didn't know why she took it, only that leaving it felt wrong somehow. When she returned, Caleb was mounted and holding the reins of her mare. His eyes flicked to her saddlebag where she'd tucked the picture, but he said nothing. They rode out as the first stars appeared, heading northwest into the gathering darkness. The night was cool and clear, perfect for travel. They kept a steady pace, not pushing the horses but covering ground efficiently. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on sandy soil. Clara found herself watching Caleb's back, the set of his shoulders, the way he constantly scanned the horizon. Even in flight, he carried himself like a guardian. Near midnight, they stopped to rest the horses at a small spring. While the animals drank, Clara and Caleb sat on a fallen log, sharing water and dried meat. Tell me about Catherine, she said suddenly. He stiffened. Why? Because she's here with us anyway. Might as well know who I'm traveling with. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Fair enough. He was quiet for a moment, gathering words. She was bright, like sunlight, always laughing, always seeing the good in things. Tom met her at a church social before the war. Fell hard. They were planning a life together, farm, children, the whole dream. And you. I was happy for them. Tom deserved happiness. He paused. When I met her, I understood why he loved her. She had this way of making you feel like you mattered, like you were worth something. For a man who'd seen what we'd seen in the war, you fell in love with her. God help me, yes. But I would never have... He stopped, jaw clenched. Tom knew. I think, at the end, when he was dying in that field hospital, he made me promise to take care of her, not marry her, just make sure she was safe, provided for. I think it was his way of forgiving me. Clara reached out, placed her hand over his. That was cruel of him. No, he was giving me purpose, something to live for when I didn't much want to. His hand turned under hers, fingers interlacing. I sent her money, wrote letters, tried to watch over her from a distance, but she was proud. Wouldn't take charity, she said. Moved to Denver to work as a seamstress. I should have gone to her, should have insisted. Stop. Clara squeezed his hand. You can't protect someone who won't be protected. Believe me, I know. They sat in silence, hands linked, while the horses stamped and snorted nearby. Finally, Caleb stood, pulling her up with him. We should move on, but he didn't release her hand immediately. They stood close in the moonlight, the space between them charged with possibility. Clara felt her heart racing, knew he must feel her pulse where their wrists touched. Clara, I know, the promise. It's not just that. His free hand came up to cup her cheek. You're running for your life. I'm supposed to be protecting you, not what? Not wanting you the way I do. The admission hung in the air between them. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Maybe wanting me doesn't mean failing her, she whispered. Maybe it just means you're alive. She felt him tremble, the war inside him playing out in the tension of his body. Then, with a sound that might have been surrender or prayer, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might shatter. But when she responded, pressing closer, something broke free in him. His arms came around her, crushing her against him, the kiss deepening into something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. This changes things, he said roughly. Everything's already changed. He pulled back to look at her, and she saw wonder mixed with the guilt in his eyes, but before either could speak again, a sound carried on the night wind, horses, moving fast. Caleb went rigid, pushing Clara behind him as he drew his rifle. Mount up, now! They swung into their saddles, Caleb leading them away from the spring at a controlled pace, trying not to leave obvious tracks. The sound of pursuit grew closer, at least 3 riders, maybe more. This way, Caleb hissed, guiding them into a narrow canyon. They pushed deeper into the twisting passage, hooves echoing off stone walls. Behind them, shouts indicated their pursuers had found the spring. They'll see our tracks, Clara whispered. Maybe, but this canyon splits 3 ways ahead. Might buy us time. They reached the junction, and Caleb chose the leftmost passage without hesitation. It narrowed further, forcing them to ride single file. Clara's heart pounded as the walls seemed to close in, the strip of starry sky above growing thinner. Then, disaster. Her mare stumbled on loose rock, going down hard. Clara hit the ground rolling, pain shooting through her shoulder. The mare struggled up, limping badly. Clara! Caleb was beside her in an instant, hands checking for injuries. I'm okay, but the horse... They could both see the mare couldn't continue. Behind them, echoing off the canyon walls, came the sound of pursuit entering the narrow passage. Get up behind me, Caleb ordered. Your horse can't carry us both, not at speed. Get up, she obeyed, wrapping her arms around his waist as he spurred his mount forward. They burst out of the canyon onto an open plateau, exposed in the moonlight. Caleb pushed the horse hard, but Clara could feel the animal struggling under their combined weight. There, Caleb pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. We'll make a stand. They reached the rocks just as the first riders emerged from the canyon. Caleb swung down, pulling Clara into cover as bullets whined overhead. Can you shoot?" He thrust a revolver into her hands. Samuel made sure I couldn't. Another bitter gift from her husband. He'd forbidden her to learn, keeping her helpless. "Then keep your head down and reload for me." The firefight was brief but vicious. Caleb was efficient, picking his shots carefully. 2 men fell before the others pulled back to cover. In the lull, Clara could hear them shouting to each other. "Mrs. Whitmore, we know you're there. Come out peaceful like and nobody else needs to die." "Like hell," Caleb muttered, checking his ammunition. "They want me alive." Clara realized. "They need me to find those ledgers. Small comfort if they kill me to get to you." She gripped his arm. "Caleb, you should go. Take the horse and—" He kissed her, quick and fierce. "Stop talking nonsense and hand me those cartridges." The standoff stretched on. Clara lost track of time, focused only on keeping Caleb's guns loaded, trying not to flinch at each exchange of fire. Then, just as dawn was breaking, she heard something that made her blood run cold. More horses, many more. "Reinforcements," Caleb said grimly. "This is about to get ugly." But the new arrivals weren't who they expected. A voice boomed across the plateau. "This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Morrison. Everybody hold your fire." The shooting stopped. In the growing light, Clara could see a group of lawmen spreading out, surrounding both their position and the bounty hunters. "Mrs. Whitmore," the marshal called. "I've got a federal warrant for your arrest. Come out slow and peaceful. Nobody else needs to die today." Caleb looked at her, jaw set. "We can still fight." "No." Clara placed her hand over his on the rifle. "No more killing for my sake. They'll take you back. There'll be a trial." "I know." She managed a trembling smile. "But I'll be alive, thanks to you." His face was anguished. "Clara, I know." She touched his cheek. "I know." She stood slowly, hands raised, and walked out from the rocks. The marshals moved in, professional but not rough. As they bound her hands, she looked back at Caleb one last time. He stood among the rocks like a statue, the rifle hanging loose in his hands, looking more defeated than if he'd taken a bullet. "I'll come for you," he called. "I'll find a way. Keep your promise," she called back as they led her to a horse. "The one you made to yourself. To do one thing right. You did, Caleb. You kept me safe." They rode away as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold. Clara didn't look back again. She couldn't bear to see him standing there, another ghost to haunt him, another woman he'd failed to save. But she carried with her the memory of his kiss, the feeling of being held like something precious. And for now, that was enough to sustain her through whatever came next. The morning after Clara's arrest, Caleb rode hard for Tucson. His horse was spent. His body ached from the night's fight. But he couldn't rest. Not while she was locked in some cell, waiting for a trial that would likely see her hanged or imprisoned for crimes that weren't hers. The marshal's office sat on a dusty side street, built of adobe and determination. Caleb tied his horse and pushed through the door, ignoring the deputy who tried to stop him. "Need to see Marshal Morrison," he said. "Marshal's busy. Tell him Caleb Hart wants to talk about Clara Whitmore." 10 minutes later, he sat across from Morrison, a weathered man with intelligent eyes and gray threading his mustache. Between them lay wanted posters, telegrams, and a file thick with reports. "Mr. Hart, my men tell me you put up quite a fight last night. She's innocent." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "That's for a judge to decide. Woman's husband was running guns to Apache raiders, Mexican revolutionaries, and worse. Hard to believe she didn't know anything. You ever been locked in a shed for 3 days straight? Marshal? Ever had someone control every move you made? Every person you talked to? You saying he abused her? I'm saying Samuel Whitmore was a bastard who kept his wife prisoner. Whatever he did, she wasn't part of it." Morrison studied him. "You seem mighty sure about a woman you've known. What, few weeks? Long enough. Long enough to compromise your judgment, seems like." The marshal opened the file, scanning pages. Says here you served with distinction in the war, settled at Dust Hollow 5 years back. Clean reputation. Why throw it away for a woman you barely know? Caleb was silent for a moment, choosing his words. You ever fail someone? Marshall? Someone you swore to protect? We all have our regrets, son. Then you know what it's like. The weight of it. How it sits on your chest every damn morning. He leaned forward. I've got a chance to do right by someone. Don't care what it costs me. Morrison closed the file. Noble sentiment, but the federal prosecutor's already here from Phoenix. Charles Pemberton, ambitious fellow, looking to make his name. He's convinced Mrs. Whitmore knows where those ledgers are hidden. She doesn't. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, it's out of my hands now. Morrison stood. Best thing you can do is find her a good lawyer. Trial's set for 2 weeks from now. Caleb left the marshal's office with a sick feeling in his gut. He'd seen ambitious prosecutors before. Men who cared more about convictions than truth. Clara needed help, and he had no idea how to provide it. He spent the day in Tucson using what money he had to secure a room and stable his horse. The town was bustling, full of merchants and miners, cattlemen and gamblers. Nobody paid attention to one more dusty cowboy walking the streets. The jail sat behind the courthouse, a squat building of thick adobe walls and barred windows. Caleb circled it twice before approaching the guard. Need to see the Whitmore woman. No visitors except her lawyer. She got one. The guard shrugged. Court'll appoint someone, I suppose. Caleb pressed a silver dollar into the man's hand. 5 minutes. Just need to know she's all right. The guard glanced around, then pocketed the coin. 5 minutes. And you didn't get it from me. The cells were small and dim, smelling of unwashed bodies and despair. Clara sat on a narrow cot in the last cell, still wearing the same dust-covered dress from their flight. When she saw him, she rose quickly, gripping the bars. Caleb, you shouldn't be here. Are you hurt? Did they... I'm fine. But her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, just tired. They stood close, the bars between them like everything else that kept them apart. Caleb covered her hands with his. I'm getting you out of here. Don't make promises you can't keep. I keep my promises. You know that. She smiled sadly. What about your ranch? You can't just abandon everything. Already arranged. The Baxter spread will look after my stock until I get back. Until you get back from what? From wherever this takes us. He squeezed her hands. I'm not leaving you, Clara. Not now. Not ever. Time's up. The guard called. Caleb. Her voice broke. That photograph, I took it from the cabin. It's in my saddlebag. If they haven't thrown it away, I don't know why I know why. He pressed his forehead against the bars, close enough to feel her breath. I'll get it. And I'll get you out. Just hold on. That night, Caleb sat in a saloon nursing whiskey he didn't want, listening to talk flow around him. Pemberton's name came up several times. The prosecutor was staying at the best hotel, already interviewing witnesses, building his case. Heard he's planning to run for territorial governor. One man said, conviction like this would sure help his chances. The woman's guilty as sin, another added. Living high on blood money while her husband sold guns to savages. Caleb's hand tightened on his glass, but he kept quiet. Starting a fight wouldn't help Clara. Near midnight, a well-dressed older man sat down across from him, uninvited. He had the look of a lawyer, soft hands, sharp eyes, expensive suit worn like armor. Josiah Merrick, the man said, extending his hand. I understand you're friends with Mrs. Whitmore. What's it to you? I might be interested in representing her, for the right incentive. How much? $200. Up front. Caleb had $40 to his name. That's steep. That's the price of a fighting chance, Mr. Hart. Without proper representation, that woman will hang. Merrick stood, leaving a card on the table. Think about it, but don't think too long. Pemberton's already building quite a case. Caleb spent the rest of the night in his room, staring at the ceiling, calculating options. His ranch was worth something, but selling would take time Clara didn't have. His horses, his guns. Everything he owned might fetch half what Merrick wanted. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He rode out to the place where they'd captured Clara, finding her saddlebags still there, tossed aside by the marshals. The photograph was inside, undamaged. He stared at it for a long moment. At his younger self. At Catherine. At the promises that had shaped his life. Then he tucked it inside his coat and rode back to town. The pawnbroker's shop opened at 7. Caleb laid out his guns, his father's watch, everything of value he carried. $60 for the lot, the man offered. Need more than that, don't we all? But something in Caleb's face made the pawnbroker reconsider. 75, final offer. It still wasn't enough. Caleb was about to leave when he remembered the photograph. He pulled it out, frame and all. This too. The pawnbroker examined the silver frame. Nice work. $20. Caleb hesitated. Selling the last piece of Catherine felt like betrayal. But Clara was alive, locked in a cell, needing help. Deal! He left with $95 and empty pockets. Still not enough for Merrick, but maybe enough to persuade him to start. But when he reached Merrick's office, the lawyer shook his head. 200, Mr. Hart. This isn't charity. I'll get the rest. When? The trial's in 12 days now. I need time to prepare, investigate, build a defense. I said I'll get it. Merrick studied him. You really love this woman. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. Yes. Then you'd better work fast, because love won't save her from the gallows. The next days blurred together. Caleb took any work he could find. Breaking horses, hauling freight, even mucking stables. Every cent went toward Merrick's fee. At night, exhausted and filthy, he'd stand outside the jail, hoping Clara might see him through her window and know she wasn't alone. On the 4th day, he ran into someone unexpected. Tom's brother, Matthew, in town on business. They'd served together, and Matthew greeted him warmly until he learned why Caleb was in Tucson. You're helping that woman, the gun runner's widow. She's innocent, Matt. Maybe so, but Tom wouldn't. Matthew stopped, frowning. This is about Catherine, isn't it? You're trying to make up for failing her. No. Caleb met his friend's eyes. This is about doing what's right. Matthew was quiet for a moment. Then, how much do you need? 100 more. I can lend you 50. It's all I've got on me. Matt. Tom always said you were the best man he knew. Said if anything happened to him, you'd do right by Catherine. Matthew pulled out his wallet. Seems like you're trying to do right by someone. That's good enough for me. With Matthew's loan and a week of back-breaking labor, Caleb finally had enough. He practically threw the money at Merrick, who counted it carefully before nodding. I'll take the case. No guarantees. But I'll do my best. Just get her out. First, I need to know everything, and I mean everything, about her, her husband, why you're so certain she's innocent. So Caleb told him. About the shed, the isolation, the systematic control Samuel Whitmore had exercised, about Clara's flight, her fear, the way she'd slowly come back to life at Dust Hollow. He left out only the personal moments, the kiss in the moonlight, the promises made and unmade. Merrick took notes, asked pointed questions, built timelines. It's not much, he said finally. Pemberton has witnesses placing her at meetings with buyers, bills of sale with her signature, forced signatures. You didn't see her hands shake when she talked about him. A jury might not care about shaking hands. Mr. Hart. They'll care about evidence. Then find some. Merrick smiled thinly. I'll do what I can. In the meantime, stay away from her. Pemberton's already suspicious of your involvement. Don't give him ammunition. It was good advice Caleb couldn't follow. That night, he bribed the guard again, needing to see Clara, to tell her about Merrick. She looked worse, thinner, shadows under her eyes deeper. But when she saw him, she smiled. You came back. Said I would. He pulled out the photograph, showed it to her through the bars. Found this. Her fingers traced the image. Why did I take it? It's not even my ghost to carry. Maybe you knew I'd need to let her go. Clara looked up at him. Have you?" Instead of answering, he told her about Merrick, about the money, about Matthew's help. "He's good. Clara, he'll fight for you. You sold everything." It wasn't a question. "Just things. Can get more things." "Caleb, no guilt, no arguing. It's done." He reached through the bars to touch her face. "Just focus on staying strong. Trial starts Monday. Will you be there?" "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The guard called time again. As Caleb turned to go, Clara called after him. "The answer is yes." He looked back. "What?" "That night at the spring. When you kissed me, I've been thinking about it. And the answer is yes." "To all the questions you didn't ask?" "Yes." He stood frozen, her words hitting him like bullets. Then the guard was there, ushering him out, and the moment was gone. But her yes echoed in his mind as he walked back to his shabby room, as he lay sleepless in the narrow bed, as he counted the days until her trial. Monday couldn't come fast enough, and when it did, he'd be there in the courtroom, watching Merrick fight for her freedom, carrying her yes like ammunition against whatever came next. The mountain trail twisted upward through stands of pine and aspen, leaving the desert heat behind. They'd been riding for 3 days since leaving Tucson, pushing north toward Colorado territory. Clara rode beside Caleb now, no longer the frightened woman who'd fled Larkspur, but someone harder, tempered by trial and vindication. The trial had lasted 4 days. Merrick had been brilliant, systematically destroying Pemberton's case. The signatures were proved forged. Clara's real signature looked nothing like the scrawls on those bills of sale. Witnesses crumbled under cross-examination, admitting they'd never actually seen her at those meetings, only assumed she was there. And then Merrick's masterstroke, producing the doctor who'd treated Clara's injuries over the years, documenting the systematic abuse that made her a prisoner, not an accomplice. The jury deliberated for 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty. But freedom from prison wasn't freedom from the past. The good people of Tucson made that clear, whispering behind their hands, moving away when she walked by. Even vindicated, she was still the gunrunner's widow, tainted by association. "We'll start fresh in Colorado," Caleb had said, and she'd agreed. There was nothing left for either of them in Arizona except ghosts. Now, camped by a mountain stream. They sat close to the fire as night fell around them. The altitude made the air thin and cold, so different from the desert they'd left behind. "You're quiet tonight," Caleb observed, adding wood to the fire. "Thinking about Samuel?" Clara admitted, "Not him exactly, just wondering if I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder. Takes time, but yeah, one day you'll realize you haven't thought about him in weeks, then months." He stared into the flames. "Took me 3 years to stop seeing Catherine everywhere I looked. Do you see her now?" "No." He looked at her across the fire. "I see you." The simple honesty of it made her heart race. They'd been careful since the trial, maintaining a respectful distance despite everything that had passed between them. But here in the wilderness, with no one to judge or whisper, that careful distance felt foolish. "Tell me about Colorado," she said, deflecting from the intensity of the moment. "Green," he said simply. "After Arizona, it's so green it hurts your eyes. Mountains tall enough to scratch the sky, snow that stays on the peaks even in summer, and space, enough space for a man and woman to build something without the past crowding in." "What kind of something?" He was quiet for a moment. "Whatever we want. Ranch, maybe horses, cattle if we can afford them. Place where nobody knows our names or cares about our history." "Our?" she asked softly. He met her eyes across the fire. "If you'll have me." 3 days on the trail, and this was the first time either had acknowledged what hung between them, the promise of something more than just traveling companions fleeing their pasts. "Caleb, I know we haven't talked about what happened before the trial, that night at the spring, what you said in the jail." He shifted uncomfortably. "Figured you had enough to deal with without me pushing. You kissed me. she said simply. And I said yes, to all the questions you didn't ask. Things said in jail cells don't always hold in daylight. She stood, moving around the fire to sit beside him. Then let me say it again. In firelight, yes. He turned to look at her, and she saw everything in his eyes. Desire, hope, and that ever-present shadow of guilt. I'm not the man I was before the war, he said quietly. Got too many ghosts, too many failures. You deserve better than some broken-down cowboy trying to outrun his past. And I'm not the woman I was before Samuel. I've been locked up, beaten down, nearly hanged for another man's crimes. She took his hand, rough and calloused from work. Maybe that makes us perfect for each other. Two broken people who understand what it means to survive. He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. Clara, no more talking, she whispered. We've done enough talking. This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no ghost standing between them. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and she felt the careful control he'd maintained finally shatter. The kiss was hungry, desperate, full of all the words they hadn't said and promises they were afraid to make. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said roughly. Court you proper. Marry you if you'll have me. Give you the life you should have had. I don't want the life I should have had, Clara said. I want the life I have now, here, with you. They made love there by the fire, under a canopy of stars, with the mountain wind singing through the pines. It was nothing like what Clara had known before. There was tenderness mixed with passion, a reverence in the way Caleb touched her, as if she were something precious he was afraid might disappear. Afterward, they lay wrapped in blankets, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. I love you, he said quietly, the words seeming to surprise him. Don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night when you showed up at the stage stop, looking like you'd wrestle the devil himself rather than go back. Maybe when you bandaged my hand and didn't ask for anything in return. Or maybe when they led you away, and I realized I'd rather die than lose you. Clara lifted her head to look at him. I love you too, despite all the reasons I shouldn't, despite knowing that loving someone means risking losing them. She traced the scar on his shoulder, a reminder of violence survived. But you're worth the risk, Caleb Hart. They stayed awake most of the night, talking in the way of new lovers, sharing stories, dreams, fears. Caleb told her about the farm in Texas he'd lost, the family scattered by war and disease. Clara spoke of the girl she'd been before Samuel, who'd loved books and horses and had dreams of seeing the ocean. We could do that, Caleb said. See the ocean, after Colorado, after we get settled. You'd take me to see the ocean? I'd take you anywhere you wanted to go. But even as they planned a future, the past intruded. Near dawn, Clara woke from a nightmare, Samuel's face floating before her, his hands reaching for her throat. Caleb held her until the shaking stopped, murmuring reassurances. But they both knew the ghosts wouldn't vanish just because they'd found each other. 3 days later, they reached the town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado. It was smaller than Tucson, built in a valley between towering peaks, with a main street of log buildings and a sense of prosperity from nearby silver mines. We'll need supplies, Caleb said, studying the town from a rise above, and information about land for sale, and work, Clara added, until we can afford that land. They rode in together, aware of the curious looks they drew, a trail-worn couple with Arizona dust still on their clothes. But the looks were merely curious, not hostile, and Clara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The general store was run by a German couple, the Steinbachs, who were helpful without being nosy, while Caleb inquired about work at the nearby ranches. Clara looked at fabric and household goods, imagining a home of their own. You are newly married, yes? Mrs. Steinbach asked, noticing how Clara fingered a bolt of blue calico. Not yet, Clara admitted, then blushed at the admission. Mrs. Steinbach smiled knowingly. The mountains make for good weddings. Father Miguel at the church. He performs lovely ceremonies. That evening, in a room above the saloon, the only lodging available, Caleb brought up what Mrs. Steinbach had said. She's not wrong. About the wedding. Clara looked up from mending a tear in her riding skirt. Are you proposing, Mr. Hart? He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. I've got nothing to offer except hard work and promises. No ring, no fine house, no guarantee except that I'll love you until my last breath. But if you'll have me— Yes, she interrupted. Yes, of course, yes. He kissed her hands, then her lips, and for a moment the shabby room might have been a palace. Tomorrow? He asked. Don't want to wait any longer. Tomorrow. She agreed. But the next morning brought complications. A letter was waiting at the postal office, forwarded from Tucson. Merrick's careful script conveyed urgent news. Samuel's associates had been arrested, and they were talking. Clara's name had come up, not as an accomplice, but as a potential witness. They want me to testify, she said, sinking onto the hotel bed. In Phoenix, about what I saw, what I heard. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. She looked at him steadily. These men destroyed lives. Caleb sold guns that killed innocent people. If my testimony can help stop them, it could be dangerous. They have friends, influence, and I have you. She stood, moving into his arms. I won't hide anymore. Won't let fear rule me. We'll go to Phoenix. I'll testify. And then we'll come back here and build that life we talked about. Caleb held her tight. Together? Together. They were married that afternoon in the small log church, with the Steinbachs as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, cleaned and pressed, with wildflowers from the mountain meadows in her hair. Caleb had managed to find a simple gold band at the jeweler's, paid for with his last dollars. Father Miguel, a kind-faced Mexican priest, performed the ceremony in accented English. When he reached the part about forsaking all others, Clara saw Caleb's jaw tighten, saw him glance at the window as if Catherine might be standing there. But then he looked back at her, and his voice was strong and clear as he spoke his vows. I, Caleb, take you, Clara, to be my wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live. When they kissed as husband and wife, Clara tasted tears, hers or his. She wasn't sure, but they were tears of release, of joy, of two people who'd found each other across a landscape of loss and emerged whole. That night, in their hotel room that now felt like a bridal suite, they made love as husband and wife. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Clara asked the question that had haunted her all day. Do you think she would understand, Catherine? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I think she would want me to be happy. And you make me happy. Clara, happier than I thought I'd ever be again. No more ghosts. No more ghosts. He agreed, kissing her forehead. Just us, building something new. But even as he said it, they both knew the ghosts would linger. They were part of the fabric of who they were, the experiences that had shaped them. The difference now was that they wouldn't face them alone. Tomorrow they would start the journey to Phoenix, where Clara would stand in a courtroom once more, but this time as an accuser, not the accused. And after that, they'd return to Cedar Ridge to claim the life they'd promised each other. A ranch in the mountains. Children, perhaps. Years of quiet happiness to balance the chaos they'd survived. The ghosts would visit sometimes, in dreams or unexpected moments. But they would be just that, visitors in a life filled with love and purpose and the peculiar joy of two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. The boarding house in Phoenix stood on a quiet street lined with orange trees, their blossoms filling the air with sweetness that couldn't quite mask the underlying tension. Clara stood at the window of their second-floor room, watching men in dark suits hurry past on the boardwalk below. Some of them would be in the courtroom tomorrow when she testified. Come away from there, Caleb said softly. He sat on the bed, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Since they'd arrived 3 days ago, He'd been on edge, watching every shadow, evaluating every stranger. "I can't hide forever," she said, but moved away from the window anyway. "Just until after tomorrow. Then we're done with this place for good." They'd traveled from Colorado as Mr. and Mrs. Hart, just another couple passing through. But word of her involvement in the trial had somehow leaked. Yesterday, a man had followed them from the courthouse to their lodgings. Caleb had confronted him in an alley, and while no violence had occurred, the message was clear. Clara's testimony was unwelcome in certain quarters. "Maybe we should leave," she said suddenly. "Go back to Colorado tonight. Let them handle this without me." Caleb set down the rifle and crossed to her. "Is that what you want?" "I want to be done with it all. Samuel, his associates, the whole ugly business." She leaned into his embrace. "I want to start our life without this shadow hanging over us. Then we stay. You testify. We end this properly." He tilted her chin up. "Besides, you're the strongest woman I know. You survived Samuel Whitmore. These men are nothing compared to him." That night, they ate dinner in their room rather than risk the dining hall. Clara picked at her food, rehearsing tomorrow's testimony in her mind. Merrick had prepared her well via telegram, but knowing what to say and saying it in a room full of hostile faces were different things. "Tell me about the ranch again," she said, needing distraction. "The one we're going to build?" Caleb smiled, recognizing the tactic. "Well, we'll need good water first. Spring-fed creek if we can find one. Build the house on high ground. Learned that from flash floods in Arizona. Start small, maybe 3 rooms, but plan for expansion. Children need space." She agreed softly. They'd only spoken of children once, tentatively, but the idea had taken root, a family of their own, untainted by the past. "Barn needs to come first, though," Caleb continued. "Can sleep in a tent if needed, but horses need proper shelter in Colorado winters." Practical man. "You didn't marry me for my poetry." "No," she agreed, kissing him. "I married you for your steadfast heart." They went to bed early but slept little. Clara dozed fitfully, waking often to find Caleb sitting by the window, watching the street. Near dawn, she gave up on sleep entirely. "Let's go for a walk," she said. "I need air before everything." He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close." The streets were nearly empty in the pre-dawn light. They walked toward the edge of town, where the desert began its sprawl toward distant mountains. The air was cool, almost cold, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "After today, no more looking back," she said. "Promise me." "I promise, although—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "The past made us who we are. Clara, without it, we'd never have found each other. A high price to pay for love." "Maybe, but worth it." They'd turned back toward town when it happened. 3 men stepped out from behind a stable, blocking their path. Clara recognized one from the courthouse, James Colton, one of Samuel's former partners. "Mrs. Whitmore," Colton said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Or is it Mrs. Hart now? Either way, we need to discuss your testimony." Caleb stepped forward, hand moving toward his gun. "Nothing to discuss. Move aside. Now. No need for unpleasantness." Colton's smile was cold. "We're merely suggesting that Mrs. Hart might have memory troubles in court today. Trauma does that. Makes things fuzzy. Nobody would blame her for not recalling specific details." "I remember everything," Clara said quietly. "Do you? Even the nights your husband brought you to meetings? The documents you signed? The money you helped count?" Colton stepped closer. "See, memories can go both ways. We could remember things differently, too." "You're threatening her," Caleb said flatly. "Threatening? No, just clarifying how fluid memory can be." Colton looked directly at Clara. "You've built a new life. Why risk it for men already behind bars?" "Because they deserve to stay there," Clara replied. "And because I'm done being afraid of men like you." Colton's face darkened. "Stupid woman, you could have—" He never finished the sentence. Caleb's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. The other two men reached for weapons, but Caleb already had his gun drawn. "Walk away," he said calmly. "Now." They dragged Colton to his feet and retreated, but not before one called back. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Caleb said, though they were already gone. Back in their room, Clara's hands shook as she washed the dust from her face. "They'll try something at the courthouse," she said. "Let them try." Caleb checked his weapons again. "I'll be there. Merrick will be there. Federal marshals too. You just focus on telling the truth." The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Clara wore her best dress, the one from their wedding, and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. Merrick met them at the door, looking concerned. "Heard about this morning's encounter?" he said quietly. "I've asked for additional security." "I'm not backing down," Clara said. "Didn't think you would. Just be careful. Stick to the facts. Don't elaborate. And don't let Pemberton rattle you." "Pemberton's defending them?" "He switched sides after your trial. Man has flexible ethics." Merrick squeezed her shoulder. "You'll do fine." The courtroom was stifling despite the early hour. Clara took her seat in the witness box, trying not to look at the defendant's table where 5 men sat in expensive suits, looking more like businessmen than the criminals they were. The prosecutor, a young man named Harrison, led her through the easy questions first. Her name, her marriage to Samuel, the general nature of his business. Then came the harder parts. "Mrs. Hart, did you ever witness your late husband conducting illegal weapons transactions?" "Yes." "Can you describe these occasions?" Clara took a breath, feeling Caleb's supportive presence in the gallery. "The first time was about a year after we married. Men came to the house late at night. Samuel made me serve drinks while they negotiated. I saw crates of rifles in our barn, army markings still visible." "Did you know these weapons were stolen?" "Not at first, but Samuel, he bragged when he drank, said the army boys were easy to bribe, that they'd report the weapons lost or damaged." She continued, detailing dates, names, faces burned into memory by fear and repetition. The defendants shifted uncomfortably as she spoke, recognizing the damning accuracy of her recollections. Then Pemberton rose for cross-examination, and Clara braced herself. "Mrs. Hart, you claim you were an unwilling observer to these transactions. Yet you lived comfortably on the proceeds, did you not?" "I lived as my husband dictated. In a fine house, with servants, expensive clothes, in a locked room when it suited him, with bruises hidden under those expensive clothes." Her voice grew stronger. "I was property, Mr. Pemberton. Valuable property he displayed when useful and locked away when inconvenient. Yet you never went to the authorities. With what proof? What protection? My husband had sheriffs and judges in his pocket." "So you say. But isn't it true you only turned against him after his death, when you needed to save yourself?" Clara felt her temper flare. "I turned against him the first time he locked me in a shed for 3 days without food. I turned against him every time he struck me for speaking out of turn. I survived him. Mr. Pemberton, that doesn't make me his accomplice." The questioning continued for 2 grueling hours. Pemberton tried every angle, suggesting she was complicit, that she was lying for immunity, that her marriage to Caleb was calculated to gain protection. But Clara held firm, anchored by truth and the knowledge that after today, this chapter would finally close. When Harrison redirected, he asked one final question. "Mrs. Hart, why are you testifying today, knowing the risk to yourself?" Clara looked directly at the defendants. "Because these men profit from blood. They don't care who dies from their weapons. Soldiers, civilians, children. Someone needs to speak for the dead. Today, that's me." When she finally stepped down, her legs were shaking. Caleb was there immediately, guiding her out of the courthouse through a side door. They didn't stop until they reached their boarding house, where Clara collapsed on the bed, emotionally spent. "It's done," she whispered. "It's finally done. You were magnificent," Caleb said, sitting beside her. "Pemberton didn't land a single blow that mattered. Will it be enough? Harrison seemed confident, and you gave them names, dates, details they didn't have before. He smoothed her hair back. Either way, you did your part. Time to let it go. They left Phoenix that afternoon, not waiting for the verdict. Merrick would telegraph the results to Cedar Ridge. As their hired wagon rolled out of town, Clara didn't look back. That life was finished. Ahead lay Colorado mountains and the future they'd promised each other. 2 days into the journey, they stopped in the small town of Mercy's Bend to rest the horses and resupply. It was a quiet place. Just a main street and a few dozen buildings clustered around a well. The kind of town where people minded their own business and strangers passed through without comment. We could stay here, Clara said suddenly as they ate dinner in the small cafe, instead of going all the way back to Cedar Ridge. Caleb looked around the modest establishment. Here, it's peaceful, anonymous. We could start fresh without even the Steinbachs knowing our history. What about the mountains, the ranch we planned? Mountains are all around us. And look, she pointed out the window to a faded sign. Harmon Ranch, for sale or lease. It's a sign, literally. Caleb laughed. The first genuine laugh she'd heard from him in days. You really want to stop running? I want to stop and build with you, doesn't matter where, as long as we're together. They inquired about the ranch the next morning. It was small, just 160 acres, but had good water and decent grazing. The elderly owner, Thomas Harmon, was eager to lease with option to buy, needing the income for his move to live with his daughter in California. It needs work, Harmon admitted as he showed them around. Haven't been able to keep up with repairs these last few years, but the bones are good. The house was indeed run down. The barn needed a new roof, and the fences were more suggestion than barrier. But Clara saw possibility in every broken board, every overgrown field. We'll take it, she said, looking at Caleb. He smiled at her eagerness. We'll take it, he confirmed. They moved in that week with their few possessions and a determination to build something lasting. The first night, sleeping on borrowed blankets in the empty house, Clara woke to find Caleb standing at the window again. Old habits? She asked. Maybe, or maybe just making sure this is real. He returned to their makeshift bed, pulling her close. Keep expecting to wake up and find it's all been a dream. If it is, it's a good dream. The best, he agreed, kissing her forehead. A week later, Merrick's telegram arrived. All 5 convicted, 20 years minimum. Your testimony made the difference. California offers their thanks. J.M. Clara read it twice, then handed it to Caleb. Now it's really over. He fed the telegram to the cook stove flame, watching it curl into ash. No more looking back, no more looking back. They spent the rest of the day working on the barn roof, side by side in the warm sun, building their future one board at a time. That night, exhausted and filthy but content, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. No regrets? Caleb asked. Only one. Clara said, I wish we'd found each other sooner. Then we might not have appreciated what we have. She considered this. You're right. We earned this happiness. Every bit of it. He agreed, as if in response to their contentment. Clouds began gathering on the horizon, promising rain for their newly planted kitchen garden. Clara smiled, seeing it as another sign that they'd chosen right. Here, in Mercy's Bend, they could be exactly who they were, not the gun runner's widow or the man who'd failed to save Catherine, but simply Caleb and Clara Hart, building a life together one day at a time. The news traveled slowly to Mercy's Bend, but when it arrived, it hit like a thunderbolt. Clara was in the general store, purchasing flour and salt, when she overheard 2 women whispering by the fabric counter. That woman who testified against the gun runners, living right here under false pretenses. Shameful, and her parading around like decent folk. Clara's hand stilled on the glass jar she'd been examining. The shopkeeper, Mr. Donnelly, cleared his throat uncomfortably. That'll be $2, Mrs. Hart. She paid mechanically, aware of the sudden silence, the eyes following her movement. Outside, she nearly collided with Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, who drew her skirts aside as if Clara carried disease. By the time she reached home, word had clearly spread further. 3 of their hired hands were loading their belongings onto a wagon. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "Sorry, ma'am." The eldest, Jake, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Can't work for, well, just can't stay. Because of who I was, not who I am. People talk, ma'am, got families to think of." They left without another word, taking with them weeks of planned labor. Clara stood in the dusty yard, supplies still in her arms, watching her carefully built new life begin to crumble. Caleb found her there an hour later, still standing, still holding the packages. "Clara, what's wrong?" she told him in halting words, the whispers, the snubs, the departing workers. His face darkened with each detail. How did they find out? Does it matter? Someone recognized my name, or saw an old newspaper, or just put pieces together. She finally set down the packages, shoulders sagging. "We were foolish to think we could escape it. We're not running again. Maybe we should find somewhere." "No." He gripped her shoulders. "This is our home. We've worked too hard to let gossip drive us away." But the next days tested that resolve. No new workers would hire on. Neighbors who'd been friendly became distant. The Sunday after the news broke, they attended church as usual, only to watch the congregation shift away, leaving them isolated in their pew like an island of contamination. Reverend Mills preached about forgiveness, his eyes finding them repeatedly, but his message fell on deaf ears. After the service, as they filed out, someone hissed "Jezebel" just loud enough to be heard. Clara kept her head high until they reached their wagon, then crumpled against Caleb's shoulder. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am tainted." "Stop that." His voice was fierce. "You're the bravest, strongest, most honorable woman I know. If they can't see that, it's their blindness, not your failing." That afternoon, they worked side by side repairing fences, trying to make up for the lost hands. The physical labor helped, but couldn't entirely dispel the cloud hanging over them. Near sunset, they heard horses approaching. Caleb reached for his rifle, then relaxed as he recognized Harmon, their landlord, accompanied by 2 other men. "Mr. Hart, Mrs. Hart." Harmon's weathered face was troubled. "I'm afraid we need to discuss your lease." 4 months early for renewal talks, Caleb observed. "Yes, well, circumstances have changed." Harmon shifted uncomfortably. "These gentlemen represent a buyer interested in the property. Given the situation, I think it might be best if we terminated the lease early." "The situation being my wife's courage in testifying against criminals? The situation being bad for business," one of the other men interjected. "Nobody wants to deal with folks connected to that element. It affects the whole town's reputation." "We have a legal lease," Clara said quietly, "which includes a morality clause." The second man, clearly a lawyer, added, "Association with criminal enterprises. My wife was cleared of all charges. She was a victim, not a perpetrator. The court of public opinion renders its own verdicts. Mr. Hart." They argued for another hour, but the outcome was predetermined. They had 30 days to vacate or face legal action. After the men left, Clara and Caleb sat on their porch in stunned silence. "Where do we go now?" Clara asked eventually. "North, south. Doesn't matter as long as we're together." "It does matter. We can't keep running every time the past catches up." She stood, pacing the worn boards. "I'm tired, Caleb. Tired of being judged for surviving. Tired of paying for Samuel's sins. Then we fight." "How? With what?" "They have law, money, and public opinion on their side." Before he could answer, another rider appeared in the dying light. Clara tensed, expecting more bad news, but the rider was young, barely 16, and looked nervous rather than hostile. "Mrs. Hart, I'm Timothy Walsh. My ma sent me." Clara recognized the name. The widow Walsh ran a small farm on the other side of town with her 6 children. "She wants to know if you're still hiring for harvest work." Clara blinked in surprise. Your mother knows about me? Yes, ma'am. She says she doesn't care what folks say. Says you help put bad men in prison, and that's good enough for her. The boy shifted in his saddle. Truth is, we need the work bad. Pa died last winter, and the farm's struggling. We can't pay much, Caleb warned. And you'll face the same treatment we do. Ma says we're already outcasts. Being poor and Irish, might as well be outcasts with full bellies. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first kind words from a stranger in days. Tell your mother we'd be grateful for the help, and she's welcome to bring the younger children. We have plenty of food to share. The boy grinned and rode off with promises to return at dawn with his brothers. That Sunday, the Walsh family joined them in their isolated church pew. Mrs. Walsh, a sturdy woman with graying hair and kind eyes, sat beside Clara and shared her hymnal without comment. Her presence didn't change the congregation's attitude, but it made it bearable. After church, Mrs. Walsh invited them for Sunday dinner. Can't promise anything fancy, she said, but there's plenty and you'll be welcome. The Walsh home was small and worn but scrupulously clean. The children, ranging from Timothy at 16 to little Mary at 5, were polite and curious. Over a simple meal of stew and cornbread, the ice slowly thawed. My Patrick faced his share of judgment. Mrs. Walsh said quietly after the children had been sent outside. Came here with nothing but dreams and a strong back. People called him names, refused him work, treated us like dirt, but he never stopped believing we could build something good here. What changed? Clara asked. Nothing changed. We just endured, worked harder than anyone else, helped where we could. Eventually, some folks saw past the Irish part to the human part. She patted Clara's hand. Same will happen for you, given time. We may not have time. They're trying to break our lease. Mrs. Walsh's face hardened. Are they now? Well, we'll see about that. The next week brought unexpected allies. The widow Walsh. It turned out, had influence among the town's working poor, the invisible people who kept Mercy's Bend running, the Mexican families who worked the larger ranches, the Chinese laundrymen, the freed slaves who drifted west looking for a new start, all the people who knew what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond their control. They couldn't stop the legal proceedings, but they could help in other ways. Vegetables appeared on the Hart doorstep. Volunteers showed up to help with repairs. The blacksmith, a former slave named Jonas, fixed their wagon wheels and refused payment. You stood up to bad men, he said simply. That's worth more than money. The evening before the hearing that would determine their lease, Clara found Caleb in the barn, savagely pitching hay. We're going to lose, she said. He didn't deny it. Probably. Mrs. Walsh says her cousin in California needs help on his orange ranch. We could go there. Is that what you want? Clara considered. A month ago, she'd have said yes immediately. But now, I want to stay. I want to fight. But I'm so tired of fighting. Caleb set down the pitchfork and pulled her into his arms. Then let me fight for a while. You've carried this burden long enough. It's my burden. No, it's ours. For better or worse. Remember? He kissed her forehead. Tomorrow, whatever happens, we face it together. The hearing was held in the town hall. Judge Morton presiding. The room was packed, their opponents on one side, their small group of supporters on the other, and many curious neutrals filling the remaining space. The lawyer presented his case efficiently. The Harts had concealed material information when signing the lease. Their presence was detrimental to the town's reputation and economy. The morality clause clearly covered such situations. Then Caleb stood to respond. Clara had expected him to argue legal points, but instead, he spoke from the heart. Your Honor, I've been a lot of things in my life. Soldier, rancher, drifter. But the one thing I've tried to be is a man of my word. I gave my word to protect my wife, and I'll keep it till I die. He looked around the room, meeting hostile gazes steadily. You want to punish her for surviving a monster. For having the courage to speak against evil men? For trying to build an honest life after years of captivity? If that violates your morality clause, then your morality and mine are very different things. Mr. Hart, the judge began, but Caleb wasn't finished. We've worked that land honestly, paid our rent promptly, helped our neighbors when asked. If that's not enough, if my wife's past matters more than our present, then we'll go. But know this, you're not driving out criminals. You're driving out people who stood against criminals. And someday, when you need someone to stand against wrong, remember what you did here. He sat down in ringing silence. Judge Morton looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers while the room waited. Finally, he spoke. The law is clear. The morality clause exists to protect the community's standards. However, he paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. However, it must be applied fairly. If we expel everyone who's been touched by criminality, we'd empty half the territory. Men who've served time, women who've worked in saloons, children of outlaws. Where does it end? He looked directly at Clara. Mrs. Hart, you were found innocent of all charges. You aided in the conviction of dangerous men. While some may question your past associations, your current conduct has been exemplary. The hostile crowd stirred, but Morton continued firmly. The lease stands. Court dismissed. Chaos erupted. Shouts of outrage from one side, cheers from the other. Clara sat stunned until Mrs. Walsh pulled her into a fierce embrace. Didn't I tell you? Just needed time. Outside, their opponents gathered in angry knots, but the Hart supporters formed a protective circle around them. As they walked to their wagon, Jonas called out, "Celebration at the Walsh place. Bring whatever you've got." The impromptu gathering lasted until midnight. Food appeared as if by magic. Tamales from the Mexican families, dumplings from the Chinese, cornbread and greens from the black families, Irish stew from the Walshes. Children played together while adults shared stories and music. Clara stood apart for a moment, watching Caleb laugh at something Jonas said. This wasn't the acceptance of Mercedes-Benz elite. That might never come. But it was something better. The fellowship of people who understood struggle, who judged character by actions rather than associations. No regrets? Caleb asked, finding her in the shadows. None, she said firmly. This is home. Even with half the town hating us? The half that matters doesn't. She gestured to the laughing crowd. Besides, we've faced worse than small-town gossip. He pulled her close, and they swayed to the fiddle music drifting from the house. I love you, Clara Hart. And I love you, ghosts, gossips, and all, as if summoned by her words. A final rider appeared at the gate, but it wasn't trouble. It was Harmon, looking sheepish. Came to apologize, he said gruffly, and to offer a new deal. If you still want to buy the place, I'll give you fair terms. Man shouldn't let others pressure him into wrong dealing. Clara felt Caleb tense with hope beside her. Their own land, finally. Roots that couldn't be easily torn up. We'll discuss it, Caleb said carefully, but his eyes were bright. Harmon nodded and left. Around them, the celebration continued, a mixture of languages and laughter under the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. Some neighbors would remain hostile. Some battles would be lost. But tonight, surrounded by unlikely friends in their hard-won home, Clara and Caleb Hart were exactly where they belonged. The past hadn't released its hold entirely. It probably never would. But they'd found something stronger than ghosts. A community of survivors who understood that redemption was possible, that people could change, and that sometimes the greatest courage was simply refusing to run. Dance with me, Clara said, pulling Caleb toward the music. And they danced, the gunrunner's widow and the cowboy who'd loved a ghost, writing a new story with each step, each laugh, each moment of hard-won joy. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but below them, in a small Colorado town, two people who'd thought themselves beyond saving found salvation in each other and in the unexpected grace of acceptance from those who mattered most. 5 winters had passed since the trial that nearly tore their life apart. The ranch they'd named Second Chance sprawled across 500 acres now, built up piece by piece through sweat and determination. Clara stood on the porch of their expanded house, watching the snow fall gently on the Colorado landscape, transforming the rugged terrain into something soft and pristine. "Mama, look what I made." 7-year-old Thomas burst through the door, holding up a wooden horse he'd been carving with his father's help. His dark hair, so like Clara's, was dusted with wood shavings. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She knelt to examine his work, marveling at how steady his small hands had become. "You're getting as skilled as your father." "Papa says I can make a whole herd." Thomas bounced with excitement. "For Mary and Joseph, too." The twins, 5 years old now, were napping in the nursery, a room that had once seemed an impossible dream. Clara smoothed Thomas's hair, still amazed by the miracles her body had produced after years of believing Samuel's cruelty had left her barren. Caleb appeared in the doorway, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's coming in. Got all the stock secured." He ruffled Thomas's hair. "Good work on that horse, son. Why don't you go show it to Mrs. Walsh in the kitchen? Bet she has a cookie for a hard-working craftsman." Thomas scampered off, leaving his parents alone. Caleb wrapped his arms around Clara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they watched the snow fall. "Regrets?" he asked, their old ritual. "Never," she replied, as always. "You?" "Only one." He turned her to face him. "That Catherine never got to see this, to know that her death wasn't the end of the story." Clara touched his face gently. The guilt had softened over the years, though never quite disappeared. "She knows, somehow. I believe she knows." Their quiet moment was interrupted by hoofbeats in the yard. Through the swirling snow, a lone rider approached. Clara tensed. Old habits died hard, but Caleb just smiled. "That'll be Doc Morrison. Said he'd check on Sarah Cannell today." They'd taken in the pregnant girl 2 months ago. Another soul running from a brutal past. It had become their way, offering sanctuary to women fleeing dangerous men, giving them work and shelter until they could stand on their own. Some stayed for weeks, some for years. Sarah had been with them long enough to feel like family. Doc Morrison entered, shaking snow from his coat. "Baby's coming," he announced. "Tonight, I'd wager." Clara immediately shifted into action, gathering clean linens and hot water while Caleb went to fetch Mrs. Walsh. They'd been through this before, not just with their own children, but with several of the women they'd sheltered. Hours later, as a new cry pierced the winter night, Clara held Sarah's hand while she cradled her newborn daughter. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But how can I keep her? I have nothing." "You have us," Clara said firmly. "You have a home here as long as you need it. That baby will want for nothing." Later, after mother and child were settled, Clara found Caleb in the barn checking on a sick calf. The storm had intensified, making the walls creak and groan. "Another mouth to feed," she said, though her tone was light. "We'll manage. Always do." He looked up from the calf. "Besides, Thomas needs more kids around. Boy's too serious for 7, like his father. His mother's no lightweight either." Caleb secured the stall and moved to her side. "Though she smiles more than she used to, I have more to smile about." They stood together watching the storm through the barn door. The house glowed warmly through the snow. Windows lit, smoke rising from chimneys, full of life and purpose. "Remember that first winter?" Clara asked. "In the cabin at Dust Hollow? You washing trail dust off your face, me wondering how I'd gotten lucky enough to have you show up at my door." "Lucky?" She laughed. "I was running for my life, half-starved, completely lost, and still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." He pulled her close. "Still are." The barn door crashed open, and Thomas tumbled in, covered in snow. "Papa, Mama, the twins are awake and Mrs. Walsh says dinner's ready and baby Sarah is crying and—" "Breathe, son." Caleb laughed, scooping the boy up. "One thing at a time." They made their way back to the house, Thomas chattering about everything and nothing. Inside, Controlled chaos reigned. The twins, Mary and Joseph, were indeed awake, demanding attention. Mrs. Walsh commanded the kitchen with her usual efficiency, helped by two of her daughters. Sarah's baby fussed while Doc Morrison showed her how to proper hold the infant for feeding. Clara moved through it all with practiced calm, settling disputes, soothing tears, making sure everyone was fed. This was her kingdom now, not the isolated prison Samuel had created, but a home full of noise and love and second chances. After dinner, when the storm had calmed and the children were finally in bed, the adults gathered around the fireplace. Doc Morrison had stayed, trapped by the weather. Mrs. Walsh worked on her mending while Sarah dozed with her baby. Caleb read from a week-old newspaper, sharing news from the wider world. Says here they're building a school in Cedar Ridge, he mentioned, looking for teachers. You should apply, Mrs. Walsh told Clara. Lord knows you've taught enough children their letters here. Clara had been educating not just their own children, but the Walsh kids and others who found their way to second chance. What had started as necessity had become a calling. Maybe, she said thoughtfully, though I'd hate to leave, could bring the school here. Doc Morrison suggested. County's been looking for a place to serve the rural families. Your barn would work with some modifications. A school at second chance. Clara tested the words, liking their sound. For anyone who needs learning, regardless of background. Sounds like you, Caleb said with a smile. The conversation drifted to other topics. Crop prices, territorial politics, local gossip. But Clara's mind kept returning to the school idea. Another way to build something lasting, to help others rise above their circumstances. Near midnight, the storm finally passed. Doc Morrison decided to risk the ride home, and Mrs. Walsh retired to her room. She'd long ago accepted the standing invitation to stay whenever needed. Sarah had taken the baby to the small room they'd prepared for her. Alone at last. Clara and Caleb sat by the dying fire, her head on his shoulder. A school, he mused. As if we didn't have enough to do. You think it's too much? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. He kissed the top of her head. Just like you've done everything else. We've done everything else, she corrected. I couldn't have survived without you. You're stronger than you know. You'd have found a way. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to. A cry from upstairs. One of the twins having a nightmare. Clara started to rise, but Caleb pressed her back down. I'll go. You rest. She watched him climb the stairs. This man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. Who'd given up everything to protect her. Who'd stood against the world for her. Who'd helped her build this life from ashes and determination. When he returned, he found her looking at the photograph on the mantel. The one from Dust Hollow. Carefully preserved. They'd hung it there as a reminder of where they'd come from. The ghosts they'd laid to rest. She would have loved this, Clara said softly. All of it. The children. The women we've helped. The life we've built. You think so? I know so. Because she loved you, and this, all of this, is who you really are. Not the guilty man trying to keep a doomed promise. But this, the protector, the builder, the father. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and they swayed slowly, dancing to music only they could hear. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world crystal and new. Inside, their home hummed with life, children sleeping safely, a new mother and baby resting, friends and chosen family sheltered from all storms. I have something for you, Caleb said suddenly. He went to his desk, returning with an official-looking document. Came yesterday, wanted to wait for the right moment. Clara unfolded it, gasping at the contents. The deed to second chance, fully paid, in both their names. How? We don't have... Been saving. Every extra penny for 5 years. Made the last payment last month. He cupped her face in his hands. It's ours. Clara. Really, truly ours. Nobody can take it away. She kissed him through happy tears, tasting love and permanence and all the sweetness life could offer those brave enough to claim it. Later, lying in their bed with Caleb's arms around her and the house settling into peaceful sleep around them. Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The terrified woman fleeing Larkspur would never have imagined this. A home full of love, children of her own, a purpose beyond mere survival. "What are you thinking?" Caleb murmured, half asleep. "About that night in the rain, when you kissed me and broke your promise. Best broken promise I ever made." Caleb. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for being worth choosing." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. But inside Second Chance Ranch, warmth reigned. In the nursery, Thomas dreamed of wooden horses. Down the hall, the twins slept peacefully. In her room, Sarah nursed her daughter, whispering promises of a better life. And in the main bedroom, Clara and Caleb Hart held each other close, two souls who'd found redemption in love and purpose. The photograph on the mantel stood witness to it all, the past acknowledged but no longer controlling, the ghosts at peace, and the future stretching bright with possibility. Second Chance Ranch lived up to its name, offering new beginnings to all who needed them. Proof that sometimes the best stories were the ones written after the darkness, in the light that two people could create together. In the morning, there would be chores and children and all the beautiful chaos of their life. But for now, in the quiet of a Colorado winter night, there was only this: the whisper of snow against windows, the crackle of embers in the hearth, and two hearts beating as one. Finally and forever home. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening to this story? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like Clara and Caleb connected across their struggles. If you enjoyed this journey of redemption and second chances, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that capture the spirit of the American frontier. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What touched your heart in Clara and Caleb's story? Share your reflections in the comments below. Until we meet again around the campfire, partners.